Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, panelists, and colleagues, my name is Jean d'Aragon, Senior Sustainable Development Expert at the UN Office for Sustainable Development, UNOSD, based in Incheon, Republic of Korea. Welcome to the fourth session of the 2021-22 International Mayors Forum, taking place online from the 24th to the 27th of January 2022. The forum is organized by UNOSD in collaboration with the United Nations Center for Regional Development, or UNCRD, based in Nagoya, Japan. The UNOSD and UNCRD are both part of the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG, at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA. The general objective of the International Mayors Forum is to provide a platform for policy dialogue and knowledge sharing on key aspects related to the implementation of international agreements for sustainable development, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals at local level. This edition of the International Mayors Forum is also looking at the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on cities and local governments. It also aims to identify potential solutions which can support a swift recovery from the current crisis and accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, as well as other international agreements for sustainable development. The first three sessions of this year's forum were focusing on some of the various areas and goals where cities and communities contribute and how to strengthen this contribution in that regard. In the same perspective, tonight's session will focus on some aspects of the means of implementation and partnerships for the goals, Goal 17. During the session tonight, we will hear about two major forthcoming conferences, the UN Ocean Conference and the UN Water Conference, and opportunities for local government and communities to engage given the critical role of local governments in achieving SDG 14 and SDG 6. We will also hear about different tools and instruments for enhancing international and domestic financial resources mobilization to improve public services provision, support sustainable COVID-19 response and recovery, and accelerate SDGs delivery. Before we start, I'd like to remind the speakers and presenters to try to keep their presentation within the time allotted, because we have a very tight schedule. Also, please don't forget to mute your microphone when not speaking to ensure minimal background noise while others are presenting and speaking. As well, there's a parallel chat during the forum, so please feel free to use the chat box to engage with the audience, answer questions that are addressed to you, open to all. I'd like also to invite the audience to make use of the chat box to ask questions or share your comments. Please mention who you are, to whom your question or comment is directed, and from whom you would like to get a response. Also, please note that all the material will be uploaded and available on the Mayors Forum webpage, including the speeches, presentation, as well as the video recordings of all the sessions. The e-link will be provided in the chat box. Thank you. Now let's start with our first speaker. And I would like also to remind you that you could find the speakers' bios on the forum's webpage as well. So now I would like to invite Ms. Lotta Tatinen, Chief of the Outreach and Partnership Branch, Division for Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG, UNDESA in New York. Welcome, Lotta, and thank you for taking the microphone now and presenting. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. And I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this very important annual gathering of mayors. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some engagement opportunities for local and regional governments in connection with two major intergovernmental processes that are unfolding in 2022 and 2023, and where the contributions of local and regional governments are absolutely critical. The first of these intergovernmental processes is the upcoming United Nations Ocean Conference, which will be held in Portugal, Lisbon, from 27 June to 1 July this year. The overall focus of the United Nations Ocean Conference will be how to scale up ocean action that is based on science and innovation in support of SDG 14, as well as to take stock, forge new partnerships, and provide solutions for protecting our oceans. This conference is co-hosted by Kenya and Portugal, and the preparations are from the United Nations side, led by the Undersecretary General of UN DESA, our department, as well as the Office for Legal Affairs, and of course with the overall guidance of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General on Ocean, Ambassador Peter Thompson. Next slide. As I mentioned, this conference will be held from 27 June to 1 July in Lisbon. A detailed program is already available on the website, and I would like to invite you to look at that program. It will feature a number of plenary sessions and also 8 multi-stakeholder interactive dialogues. We expect a large number of member states at the highest level, as well as UN entities, IGOs, local and regional government representatives, civil society, private sector, youth, philanthropic organizations, and others to attend this event in person. Next slide. On this slide, you will see the website of the conference, and I invite you to take a look for more details, including possibilities for participation, the detailed program. Also, there will be information about side events, related background documents, and so forth. Next slide, please. In order to participate in this conference, all non-governmental entities need to first have special accreditation. We have just opened a third and last round for entities to request accreditation by the United Nations in order to be able to participate. I would like those of you who are interested, I would like to invite you to look at the special accreditation process and see whether you should apply for accreditation. In many instances, representatives of local and regional governments attend conferences as part of their official delegations, in which case you do not need special accreditation. Next slide, please. In connection with this conference, we are looking to see how could we mobilize coastal cities, given their tremendous impact that they have on SDG 14. We will be organizing an informative webinar with the co-hosts and the Special Envoy of the Secretary General to cities about this conference. The date will be on 17 February. We will share information with Jean and his team so he can circulate this also with all the participants of this event. So you can hear firsthand on how we hope to get coastal cities to come to the conference and also present opportunities for making commitments on reducing, for example, waste flows into the ocean. It will also be a possibility for you to network with other cities. We are hoping to engage large networks such as the C40, UCLG, etc. As I mentioned, we will also be inviting all actors, including cities, to register their voluntary commitment and join communities of ocean action that are online. And lastly, what I would like to propose is there will also be an opportunity for actors to organize side events in connection with the conference. If you are interested in organizing a side event, the details for how to do so will be available on our website shortly. Next slide. The other major conference that I would like to draw your attention to is happening in 2023, which is the UN Water Conference. Member states have decided that there will be a UN Water Conference held in March 2023 in New York. From the website of the conference is listed on this this slide, so you can see some more details about the conference. Next slide, please. The water conference will be hosted by the governments of Tajikistan and the Netherlands, who have drafted a comprehensive vision that the conference will address. In the lead up to the 2023 conference, we will be working very closely with Tajikistan and Netherlands to prepare for an inclusive preparatory process, including engaging stakeholders, and also for engaging different stakeholders during the conference itself. There will be a one-day preparatory meeting held in November this year at UN headquarters in New York. The conference itself in March 2023 will feature 6 plenary meetings, as well as 5 interactive dialogues that will be collaborative and multi-stakeholder in nature. And we hope to also feature clearly the voices of local government in these multi-stakeholder interactive dialogues. Next slide, please. While we are still gearing up our preparations for the conference, we are currently envisaging that stakeholders will be able to organize around 2 key tracks to prepare for the conference. The first is, of course, we will do awareness raising and information sharing with all constituents about this event, how to engage the importance of SDG 6 through different channels. And secondly, we will be looking to create meaningful space for stakeholders to engage and contribute to both the preparations and the conference itself. Next slide. We have created an informative email list where we are sharing periodic updates about the conference, and you can join this email list through the conference website. Amongst others, we are preparing information newsletters where we highlight key issues. We are also going to be organizing periodic virtual briefings and seminars to stakeholders to bring them up to speed on all preparatory processes. We have, of course, also created a dedicated page on our website for stakeholder engagement where you can find detailed information. And also, we are doing regular outreach through our social media channels. Next slide. We will be seeking, in particular, substantive inputs from all stakeholders. And to do so, we will be conducting online consultations to seek suggestions. The first of these online consultations will be opened up soon on the themes of the different interactive dialogues that we held. We will also be looking for, again, new water-related commitments to be made by all stakeholders, including mayors, at the conference. We will be providing space for side events and other events during the conference. And we will be facilitating stakeholder participating in the preparatory meeting in November 2022 and the conference itself, including providing opportunities to speak in the interactive dialogues and in the plenaries. More details about all of these will be available on the conference website. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'm showing a roadmap for the conference, which is also available on the conference website with key dates. Next slide, please. And to join the mailing lists for both conferences, if you are interested to receive periodic updates, I am now sharing on this slide how to join these mailing lists. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for this opportunity to brief you on these two key processes that are unfolding, and we very much hope to have your active engagement throughout both. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Lotta, for this very interesting presentation. We recognize it's very early in New York for you. Thank you. It's really appreciated. Now, I would like to have the next speaker. So Ms. Caroline Lombardo, Chief International Tax and Development Cooperation Branch, Financing for Sustainable Development Office at the UN Department of Economic Affairs and Economic and Social Affairs. So it's a short video. She could not join with the meeting today, but we have a short video we'd like to put on.
Honorable Mayors, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address the 2022 International Mayors Forum. My sincere thanks go to the organizers for this opportunity to share some of the work of the Financing for Sustainable Development Office at UNDESA with local governments across the world. As we see in the COVID-19 pandemic, local governments are the first line of defense in times of crisis, whether health, climate, or geophysical. Crises strain and often disrupt essential public services, and the consequences are the most severe for vulnerable populations in the way, for instance, that they increase gender inequality, prevent children from attending school, and create additional barriers for people with disabilities. Supporting local governments to help the SDGs could not be a more timely topic. FSDO is pursuing 3 key objectives and related activities to strengthen and engage local governments to achieve the 2030 Agenda. First, building widespread recognition that local government finance is a global development imperative. As the pandemic has shown, financial and capacity support to local governments remains woefully inadequate at national and international levels. While public service responsibilities at the local level are increasing, they are not sufficiently backed with sustained financial, fiscal support from higher levels of government. And despite the strong call in the 2030 and ODIS agendas for more and higher quality international development cooperation, official development assistance, ODA, remains far below the 0.7 GNI target, and only a small fraction of existing ODA reaches local governments. The UN Financing for Development Forum engages all stakeholders to strengthen, empower, and leverage local government finance for sustainable development. The 2021 FFD Forum, the outcome, presents key opportunities and commitments for action across all areas of the ODIS agenda, as well as action to address risks, including COVID-19 recovery and climate change. Further analytical work will continue to identify policy options to support action and help galvanize financing at the local level. The closely linked SDG investment fair helps connect investable projects at the national and local levels with a diverse range of investors around the globe. Your engagement in both platforms, FFD Forum and the SDG Fair, will be critical to ensure that policy dialogue and implementation are both actionable and grounded in local realities. A second objective and area of work, scaling up international development cooperation to deliver at the local level. Development cooperation actors should work toward more long-term, programmatic, and sequenced approaches to engaging with local governments and stakeholders. Such engagement should be structured in a way that allows for strengthened capacity building at local actors in order to ensure sustainability and adaptations of projects in the medium and long term. South-South and triangular cooperation is crucial in this respect, promoting city-to-city and local-to-local sharing of knowledge and expertise to support developing countries in strengthening their capacities. The UN Development Cooperation Forum will keep a strong focus on supporting the localization of the SDGs. The biennial DCF survey remains an important tool to understand the state of play and the effectiveness of development cooperation on the ground. The 2020 DCF survey study revealed that 70% of respondents had engaged local governments in national development cooperation forums, but more must be done to engage local governments in policy and practice. In supporting the DCF, our office, FSDO, will work to help take forward this recommendation, continuing its strong partnerships with local governments to ensure the local dimension is reflected in the ongoing work of the DCF to advance risk-informed development cooperation. Now to our third objective in strengthening and engaging local governments to achieve the SDGs, supporting local governments to increase the resilience, inclusivity, and sustainability of public infrastructure. Over the past 5 years, FSDO has brought together key partners to make more sustainable infrastructure asset management a priority item in the global agenda. The new Global Infrastructure Asset Management, or IAM initiative, is implemented jointly by UNDESA, UNCDF, and UNOPS. It provides a platform for peer learning, knowledge exchange, and capacity development that supports interested local and national governments to adopt a more systemic, more proactive approach in managing infrastructure assets for sustainable development. 3 questions guide our efforts in this area. What infrastructure assets do people need, where and when? How can these assets be made to last the longest and perform the best? How can their potential to save or generate revenue be maximized to unlock financial resources for other community needs, now and in the future? Local governments that know how to budget and plan for the financial, human, and material resources needed throughout an asset's life cycle will reap substantial social and financial benefits and strengthen the sustainability of public investments. The initiative also harnesses the linkages between infrastructure asset management and infrastructure investment. Sound infrastructure asset management increases public management confidence, bolsters creditworthiness, and it can help attract new investments from public and private sources. A key achievement of the project is the UN Handbook, Managing Infrastructure Assets for Sustainable Development, launched last year in several languages and soon available in all 6 UN languages, plus several additional local languages. The handbook shows in a visual, compelling, accessible way how infrastructure asset management can help ensure that local governments meet their required levels of public services in the most cost-effective manner while considering sustainability for current and future users. It provides decision-making tools to help governments balance risk, cost, opportunities, and performance to realize the value and service potential of an asset over its entire lifespan. UNDESA, together with UNITAR, has also launched a massive open online course, a MOOC, on infrastructure asset management for sustainable development. The course is freely accessible and it provides an in-depth and self-paced introduction to the handbook. We invite you to use these free resources and become part of our growing community of practice on infrastructure asset management. Last year alone, the IAM UN initiative reached over 2,400 local government officials from over 1,000 local governments in Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia Pacific. As a result, so far, over 150 governments have already designed multi-year asset management action plans, and these are publicly available for peer review and peer learning on the FSDO and the IAM website. Honorable mayors, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you our key initiatives of UNDESA FSDO in working with local governments on achieving the SDGs. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish you a very productive session and forum.
I would like to thank very much Ms. Caroline Lombardo, Chief International Tax and Development Cooperation Branch at the UN the Financing for Development Office, UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And we'll hear more about the asset management a bit later. Now, I'd like to introduce, there's a last minute change now. We have Ms. Bernadia Irawati Chandadewi. She will speak before Remo because she has to leave. So she will speak about local government alternative financing for COVID-19 response and recovery and accelerate SDG delivery. So Ms. Bernadia, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished mayors, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon, evening, good morning. It's really a pleasure for me to join these discussions, International Mayors Forum, that is organized by the United Nations, so SDS. And first of all, let me wish everyone here a very happy New Year and a very happy Chinese New Year. And really hope that this new year will bring everyone much safer in the world and also, of course, much brighter year. So today, in the next slide, let me share with you some of the works that we have been doing from the UCLCG Perspective. Some of you maybe already heard this organization. It was formed in 2004 as the amalgamation of 3 global organizations, EULA, UTO, and Metropolis. EULA itself was set up in 1913, and UCLG ASPAC Secretariat is based in Jakarta. So we, at the global level, we link more than 240,000 cities and local governments in all levels of subnational governments, including, of course, municipalities and associations itself. And then we are located, those members are located in more than 144 countries. And for UCLG ASPAC, this is the largest section of UCLG, which is the secretariat hosted by Provincial Government of Jakarta. So I'm greeting everyone from Jakarta, the capital city of Indonesia. So we represent almost 3.76 billion people, including China, Indonesia, India, and many other countries in Asia Pacific. So in the next slide here, I think we all are aware of the effect that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought us. We don't know when this COVID pandemic is going to end, but from this slide, the GDP projection before and after pandemic is shown here. The impact of COVID pandemic, particularly shown in the economic sector, of course, is also affecting the health as well as the education and any other aspects. But from this figure, obviously, national local government's budget has dramatically decreased. Like Jakarta itself, there is reduction of almost close to 50% of the normal revenue that they get. So this will move towards refocusing and restructuring budget priorities. So with these heterogeneous patterns across countries and regions, depending on the stringency of containment measures and degree of vaccines rollout, so even the OECD March 2021 economic outlook showed the real global GDP contracted by 3.4% in 2020, but anticipate growth of 5.6% in 2021 and 4.0% in 2022. And we know the effect is also a high increase of unemployment that we have seen as well. So in the next slide, failure to implement policies that address such concerns would worsen pre-existing vulnerabilities and make societies more unequal and polarized. In other words, there is a risk that a lack of pro-poor and inclusive policies will certainly foster poverty, polarization, and exclusion. So this risk will have intergenerational dimension, as a lack of support for poorer and more vulnerable young people will jeopardize the prospects well into the future. So this is the reality. So carefully designed, right-based, pro-poor and inclusive policies can mitigate those risks. So of course, there is a need for rapid adoption of digital technologies, including the expansion of affordable and reliable internet access, especially among children living in rural areas and lower income households. This is our urgent priorities. So in the next slide, this is also the latest figure that we found that released by UNESCAP recently. So this is necessary to know about the weakness and strength that we face currently. None of the 5 Asia-Pacific sub-regions are on track to achieve all 17 SDGs. However, some sub-regions were better positions on some part of the agenda, like East and Northeast Asia was on track to eradicate poverty, but provide a clean water and sanitation for all. And Southeast Asia was also on track to promote sustainable industry and innovation. So what we see here, all sub-regions lag behind on goals related to environment, with 4 regressing on climate actions, goal 13, and life below water. And also all sub-regions are falling behind on the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So most sub-regions also showing a very slow progress or are regressing on other environmental related goals. So this is therefore an added urgency to ensure that responses to the pandemic in the region and at the national and local level accelerate progress toward 2030 agenda. So in the next slide, this is shown the recent research outputs that we conducted together with UIAS based in Tokyo on the COVID-19 and subnational government progress on the localization of SDGs. Here is also based on the survey that done among the local governments at the ASEAN level countries. The social impact on the pandemic of a subnational government finances also has been highlighted here. And the next slides, if you are interested, we can share you the slide, this result on our survey. So SDGs and public financial management, PFM, are inseparably linked. Financing and resource mobilization capacities are key issues. And here, unfunded and unfulfilled default functions could aggravate actually development challenges. So localization of SDGs in provincial, city, municipal, and village, this also include planning and providing tools. This is a must. And monitoring not just for physical, but financial indicators as well. So what we need is effective intergovernmental transfers and other form of assistance that could significantly catalyze the attainment of SDGs target for local governments with the weak capacity especially. So in the slide number 8, the SDGs alignment agenda has the potential to both address the urgency of the response to the COVID-19, like for example, avoiding the collapse of financing for development that would have dramatic effects on the global economy. But the reality is that there are several options that local governments can access financially. So on the next slide here, this is several options that local governments could have, but of course, this depends very much on the level of decentralization in the country. So in the countries, for example, Indonesia, local governments can do everything, can even release bonds, can even create public-private partnership, can even create their own companies. So they can also, of course, have a blended funds as well. So here are some of the options that are available. This include Green Climate Fund, Transformative Action Programs, City Climate Financing Gap Fund. This is also was released by GCOM, Global Conference of Mayors on Climate Change on Energy, which UCLCG ASPAC serve as the Secretariat of GCOM for Southeast Asia. And then, of course, this includes Global Environmental Facility, GEF. Next slide, you can see also there are Biocarbon Fund, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facilities, and for Indonesia, the government has pooled several resources that is called SDGs Indonesia 1. And this fund come from all different kind of actors, come also from private companies and as well as from international bank, multilateral banks and others. So the issue is that there are a lot of financial options for local governments. However, there are lack of capacity for local governments to access those funds and also prepare bankable programs or projects that also have been seen as a challenge for local governments. And another issue also, even there is a rule given for local governments, for example, in Indonesia, on releasing municipal bonds, but there is no one single municipal bond has been released by any municipality, any city, or any local governments in this country. So what we have to think is that, well, we need regulation for local governments. We need enabling environment for local governments to be able to access those funds. However, we also have to simultaneously raise the capacity of local governments to be able to access those funds. So this kind of enabling environment is definitely needed. In the next slide, I think this is two of my last slides, local government alternative funding. We have a lot of case studies how local governments in these regions manage or manage to find funds. One of them here is the sample of Jakarta using this collaboration concept. This is new. This GDCN, Jakarta Development City Network, is actually new initiative, came from Jakarta government just maybe last or 2 years ago after the COVID occurred, that looking at the importance of collaborations in which they invite key actors to contribute to this COVID-19 recovery particularly. And also we have what we call it Integrated Resource Recovery Center. This is a joint actually program with UN ESCAP based in Bangkok, in which through this facility, it transforms organic waste into energy. And this is cost recovery. And then the amount or the volume of waste can be varied, can be 5 ton or can even much bigger, like 20 tons. So it really depends on the volume, and of course the cost recovery could be faster if there is a tipping fee on those facilities. So what I like to say here, all those kind of things are possible. I think I agree what the previous speaker maybe mentioned, that we need to really upscale those good works that already done by local governments. So in the last slide, this is conclusion. Key takeaways: COVID-19 recovery financing from national governments, financial institutions, multilateral development banks, and other sources should have a clear channels for access for local governments. And this is much even needed now with refocusing budget and priority for COVID-19 recovery, innovative financing for SDGs localization. This is much more needed than ever. Mobilization of resources through multi-stakeholders approach. This is also crucial. Local governments cannot do it alone. And mobilizing resources beyond the local government's budget have never been more critical than now. And we already know that 65% of the SDG target actionable at the local level. So it's clear that 2030 agenda cannot be achieved without cities and local governments. I don't need to explain about the importance of urbanization and other things, but what the key point here is that we have to involve local governments and cities when we talk about SDGs implementation. Partnership collaboration is the key to create a new dual formulation of internal and external circulation through openness and connectivity. Building back better. We have been talking about the Sendai framework for action, building back better. Recover to normal, bounce back does not always mean the best option. The pandemic provides opportunity. If you understand the Chinese or Japanese character, you see there is disaster. Despite disaster, there's always opportunity. This is to reflect the lessons learned and to build back better and faster and stronger. So let me conclude by thank you everyone, and my apology, John, that I need to leave after this, but I'll happy to receive any questions, maybe through email, since there is maybe later on my colleague will provide you with our email ID. But thank you, and I wish everyone a very productive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bernadia Irawati Chandradewi, Secretary General, United Cities and Local Government, Asia Pacific, UCLG ASPAC. Thank you for your presentation. And as you mentioned, we did have a session yesterday where it was discussed that COVID-19 Recovery Fund, only a very small proportion was going to local government. So that's very, very true. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Now I would like to invite Mr. Raymond Saner, Professor at Organization and International Management at the Ball University. He will talk about impact investment in cities, innovations to finance SDGs implementation at local level. Welcome, Mr. Saner, and then please take the mic. It's all yours.
All right. Dr. Jean d'Aragon, dear Jean, it's a pleasure to join you, and also regards to everybody else. Let me try to find ways now to share my slides. I think this might, do you see this slide?
We see the slides, and if you make it a presentation mode, would be even better.
Would that be okay?
That's fine now.
Very good. Thanks a lot. Well, I'd like to just continue where my predecessor left it, with a comment, and also from you, Jean, that somehow of all the funds that have been made available, not that much has been made available to municipalities. And I'd like to talk about the financing for cities, for municipalities, what can be done in order to achieve as much as we can the SDGs, despite the turn down in terms of financing because of COVID-19. So my focus will be on financing the localization of the SDGs, meaning the cities. And I suggest, with what I will share with you, there should be ample information for us in the cities to assess the advantages, but also identify the disadvantages for funding of SDGs at the local level. I'm citing here a study by the IMF, which came out just before the full blow of the COVID pandemic, but still it is still valid. It's about the following. The researchers at IMF were thinking how to assess what needs to be done in order for countries to achieve the SDGs from a financing point of view. And they looked at several key infrastructures, such as the social as well as the physical infrastructures, education, health, roads, electricity, water, and sanitation. In order to move ahead and achieve the related SDGs, they assessed the need to find money that would be about 4% of their GDP that should be made available either through taxes or other means of financing the SDGs in order to do the necessary investment in these infrastructures. However, that was about countries in general, and particularly about the emerging market economies. Here we talk about the BRICS countries like China, Brazil, India, South Africa. But while this is holds true for these countries, it is of course not the same for the least developed countries or the low-income developing countries. Here, the IMF researchers found that the necessary investment and spending to achieve the GDP would amount to about 15% of these countries' GDP. It's an enormous amount of money that has to be found if the countries, the least developed countries, can achieve their SDGs. And this raises, of course, the whole question, where should this money come from so they could move forward in terms of their SDG implementation? All of this was affected negatively, of course, because of COVID. So the figures actually should be slightly higher. But overall, the main message is it is a considerable amount of money that has to be made available for all countries, but particularly for the least developed countries. And let's not forget, many of the least developed countries, we're counting about 50 countries overall, several of them are heavily indebted. So they spend of their annual budget up to 30% just to pay interests for the debt that they have accumulated over time. So there is even in reality less money available to invest in social and physical infrastructure. But overall, at also city, municipality level, when investing or considering investment in natural or social infrastructure, here are the options. One could imagine that all of this would be done by the government, or if not possible, maybe through public procurement or through public-private partnerships, through concession type of PPPs, or some of the bigger public enterprises could be privatized, and hence they could do some of the necessary investments as a private company. Now, to all of these options, there are pluses and minuses. For instance, when thinking about infrastructure investment and development through the government, of course, such a government has to have money that comes in through mostly tax revenues. If the country and the people of this country and businesses don't pay taxes, to put it bluntly, there's no money available for the government to invest in infrastructure and hence in SDG development. Now, Scandinavian countries, for instance, people pay a very high level of taxes per year, up to 40–50%. But mind you, in these countries, there is almost very little PPPs because the government has the money and the trust from its citizens to do the necessary investment in the infrastructure development. So other countries who are either short on tax revenues or there are difficulties by debt, accumulated debt, have to look for alternative options. Part of that could come through ODA or other forms of support from developed countries. But as you all know, this support is decreasing. Hasn't increased. And hence countries sometimes think, well, maybe the option could be through public-private partnerships. Now, when we look at this, here, just summarize again a few points I made just right now. When we look at the different options, for instance, when it would be through traditional procurement, of course, to avoid corruption and ineffective forms of financing of infrastructure development, the process has to be transparent, it should be corruption-free, it should be done by professionals. That's a given, but not always the case. The local government should be competent in negotiating, for instance, and managing private sector partners through PPPs as an example. But oftentimes there are only a few knowledgeable people, for instance, in the Ministry of Finance, who know how to negotiate public-private partnerships. And on top of it, oftentimes the people who are the most competent may be moved to the private sector, and in that sense, the government has lost knowledge of people who could do the negotiation with the private sector companies. So that succession, or just simply to make sure there are enough competent people who can do the negotiations, is vital. It's very important. If the countries or the city moves into privatization, well, then the key is not only that the price should be right when a public property is sold to a private sector company, but it should be definitely not privatizing and creating now another monopoly, but simply privately owned monopoly. The government should do all it can to ensure competition and to avoid new forms of monopoly. Finally, I've been for 4 years member of the Bureau of the UNECE PPP unit, Bureau actually, and we have been discussing what could be done to make the PPP option as much fit as possible for SDG development. And there has been a progression over time from the old notion that it should be a bankable project, there should be value for money for the private company which invests, and so on. There are 2 other new concepts, and if you're interested in that, just let me know. We have published on this. There is the notion that it shouldn't just be value for money, but should be also value for society. What is generated through a PPP should be meaningful, should be beneficial for society, and not just for the few stakeholders who are in the past who've been involved in PPPs. And lastly, there is also now the concept that whatever PPPs are being negotiated, it definitely should show value for the next generation, because many of the PPPs can last 20 years. So the people who negotiate today most likely won't be the ones who will have to pay back the debt that they have, of the loan that they have to incur in order to do a PPP. So the young generation should have a say in knowing what kind of debt is being accumulated through PPPs. Now, another question is simply the legal sides to PPPs. Municipalities, as well as country national governments in general, when going for PPPs, there should be knowledge about these different options that I have here just listed on this slide. There are different forms, such as build and transfer, build, lease, and transfer, and so on. Basically, these different legal approaches show what has to be done by the company which is being, in that sense, given the opportunity to build, to construct. When would the the period end of this cooperation, would the established new road, so to speak, or port facility be handed back to the government, under what condition, and so on. These are very important legal details that our city governments should have experts who know the advantage and disadvantages of these different legal forms of PPPs. So I said already, yeah, there's a need to know what PPPs entail. Also, that there should be, if it's locally made, there should be capacity building and training on the return of investment, loss of investment, and it should be for a whole generation of government officials, not just the people in the Ministry of Finance, but also in the key infrastructure ministries, so-called line ministries, water, road, transportation, education. They should also have people who understand what PPPs are all about. But there is also another option, not just government and private sector. If you look at the SDG 17, Target 17, the text says, encourage and promote effective public, private, and civil society partnerships. In other words, there's encouragement to think of more than just public-private partnerships. It could also include, for instance, cooperatives. It could include mutuals. It could include some city community associations who, together with the private sector and the government, can engage in a meaningful form of cooperation. It doesn't have to be just only public-private partnerships. So we need to know what is the role of ministries and improve credibility and competence of our governments. When they negotiate, they should know, they should be knowledgeable. And a key other aspect we found in our own research is we have to make sure that within the government, the ministries talk to each other. There should be effective interministerial policy coordination. That's true in general for all of the SDGs. Many of you have probably read David Leblanc's very important article that came out in 2015, where he shows how the different SDGs are interdependent. In other words, if you do invest in one, you might also create benefits for another goal, for another SDGs, and conversely, if you invest too much in one goal, you might cause policy contradictions with other goals. So this has to be really well thought through, how our government works within its ministries, and also key, consultation. Our governments have to find ways to talk to its own people, to the stakeholders, to the associations, and to the private sector, and not to think that they can do all the decision making just within their own confines. Since we know that the SDGs consist of every 4 years, there is an evaluation where countries are invited to assess how far they've been able to go in terms of SDG implementation. Between or during the other years, the 3 years, monitoring is advised, and every country and every city should have a well-functioning monitoring system or mechanism put in place so the stakeholders, civil society, private sector, could reflect, get data, and feed back their concerns, or also their happiness in regards of what is being done by the city government, and also signal maybe warning signs where there is a severe or serious backlog in terms of what the strategy says, what the city wants to achieve. So we have to have a very good monitoring system, and that in many countries and many cities doesn't exist. Because oftentimes the government sees anything coming from, let's say, civil society or private sector as a potential criticism. And it has to be put right, so it is seen as a useful, constructive form of flow of data or information that the government can use to amend and redirect the traffic, so to speak, when it comes to the financing of the SDGs. I have here developed an instrument that at the level of discussion, when a city government and also its stakeholders are talking about a major infrastructure investment, there is a way to assess whatever is being proposed using the scheme that I'm showing to you very briefly. An overall assessment of, for instance, a PPP option. You could have whatever the PPP option is all about, you could assess together in the form of a discussion of informed representatives of the different stakeholder groups. What is this project going to do in terms of, here you have the general criteria. Is it going to be seen as being efficient? Is it equitable, replicable? Could this be used elsewhere and to be repeated? There are, of course, also general assessments based on people. The people criteria is what is being proposed. What does it do in terms of improvements of the livelihoods of people? What does the project, what's the project's impact on the planet, on the environment, in other words? And finally, just also about prosperity, the economy, the planet, peace. These are simple, clear criteria that could be used in the often informal discussions, what should be done or could be done in terms of infrastructure investments before going already down the road with a finished project, which is maybe bankable, but at the end, it turns out maybe to be not something that is beneficial for the community, nor for the next generation. There is social impact investment also, which is somewhat a fairly new term, and it consists of the following. Impact investing is a general investment strategy that seeks to generate financial returns while also creating a positive social and environmental impact. So it's doing business, but doing business in a way that's not harmful, but it actually should be beneficial for both social and environmental criteria. These are investors who follow impact investing, and they consider a company's commitment should be also, it should contribute to the community. So it's a form of corporate social responsibility, our sense of duty to serve the society at large. Social responsible and environmental and social governance, ESG, in other words, the acronym, is investing. There are two approaches to impact investing. The one I just mentioned first, socially responsible, SRI, or ESG. I will say a few more words on ESG. ESG goes back a few years back, actually. It's about 6 years ago. It started to become a term used in investment circles. It's about long-term investors, for instance, mutual funds, pension funds, also insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds who are interested in sustainability. And the number of these groups who express interest and commitment to do an ESG type of sustainable investment is increasing. Of course, sometimes one never knows if it's just simply lip service or whether they really mean it. But the ESG has grown in terms of being used by investors as a criteria for saying yes or no to an investment proposal. There's a lot of money at stake. In the contribution by Ziad Alexander Hayek, he is making reference to the young, the millennials, who are inheriting from their baby boomer parents a lot of fortune, a lot of money. And a lot of the young are much more inclined to make sure that climate warming is stopped, that we have a more sensible form of organizing our economy. And those who are inheriting large fortunes, a growing number of them want that the ESG criteria are applied to the investment that they're committing to. There are a lot of stock exchanges, and 350 of the large asset managers of these big insurance companies or investment funds expressed commitment to ESG principles. What is it? It goes back to 2004 when Kofi Annan, the then UN Secretary General, wrote to about 50 CEOs of major financial institutions and invited them to participate in a joint initiative that would later on be called UN Global Compact, which still exists and has grown in size in terms of the members that have joined Global Compact. But it also, together with the Swiss government support and the IFC of the World Bank Group, they started to define ways to make investment and capital markets be more sustainability oriented, or in other words, ESG oriented. E stands for environmental criteria. It includes the energy companies take and the waste they produce in terms of producing whatever product that they're going to be investing in. And it should be, in that sense, the least damaging in terms of CO2 emissions. S stands for social criteria. It's about to address the relationship a company has to its community, to its workers, and to make sure their labor relations and also diversity and gender equality are being honored. And finally, G is for governance. It's the internal system of practice, controls, and accountability. G here is really about holding companies and the investors accountable for what they have done. What they have done, if it's said to be ESG based, then it should show that the environmental and social and governance criteria are being honored and are being implemented. There is no one single best way about doing ESG. It's in that sense not yet very formalized. It's more overall accepted strategy. And people are, several other companies or consulting companies have now focused on how to make this from an operational basis, how to formalize, how to be an ESG-based social impact investor. And you can find a lot of now very useful information if you just by Google search, or if you can't find anything, just let me know and I can direct you to some of these organizations. So in conclusion, I have not mentioned 11, but 11, which is about, of course, public administration, is very key, as well as 16 and 17 when we talk about sustainable cities. The investment in physical and social infrastructure projects are needed, should be done, and it should be done in a meaningful manner, as I discussed before. And it also is supported by the quadruple A agreement, the Addis Ababa agreement on financing of development. SDG 11, urban development, requires sustainable financing, sustainable governance, and competent project managers. There is an ISO standard called ISO 19081, which is very good. It specifies what needs to be done by a government at national or at city government level in terms of moving forward to get the city into the sustainable future. Now, this is important not just because it's an ISO standard, a quality standard, but, you know, mind you, we have a few more years left, 9 in fact. Over these 9 years, most of our countries and most of our cities will have new governments. They will come and change. Maybe we'll have 2 or 3 more governments. The question is, what will be the next government's attitude and behavior when it comes to the predecessor government's actions regarding investment in infrastructure, regarding sustainable development? Are they going to be part of the old style politicians who simply are eager to put down what the previous government has done and criticize it, and then do something the opposite, that goes in the opposite direction, just to be different, so to speak? Or are they enough committed to see value in continuing some of the actions that the previous government has started? And for that, this ISO 19081 is a good long-term investment, because it puts down what a city has committed to, including commitment by the stakeholders, and not just the government, but also the main stakeholders of civil society and the private sector. And that should last beyond the inevitable changes of government that we all will see over the next 9 years. There's also 16.6, about 16.6 target to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. And 16.7 to ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making. In other words, inclusive participation when major investment decisions are being taken that either have to be paid back immediately if the government has the necessary money, or will have to be paid back by the next generation because the loans have to be paid back. Hence, it should really be major decisions that are supported by the main stakeholders. So I've come to the end. I just wanted to say the choice of financing that I already elaborated on depends on the government's ability to collect taxes. If that's not the case, then alternative forms of financing are needed, and that could be PPPs, concession PPPs, public procurement. All of this has its advantages and disadvantages, and there should be enough knowledgeable people that can discuss this from a factual point of view and not drift into politics, but to focus on the necessary gaps that have to be closed through meaningful infrastructure development. So in conclusion, I mentioned this already. Again, whatever is being undertaken by taking debt, the debt has to be paid back, and that should be also discussed before committing to large infrastructure development. It would be also good to have an observatory in a city where people representing different stakeholders together do the monitoring that I mentioned before. There needs to be feedback coming from society and also from the private sector as to how well the city is doing with the projects that it has said and has committed to undertake? Is it going in the right direction? If not, what could be meaningfully changed, amended, or improved? Well, that takes me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to possible comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Raymond. That was for this very comprehensive presentation and very interesting. I think we don't have many questions in the chat box, and I would like to. I think it's quite related also to the next presenter. So I would like to have the next presenter going, and then having the discussion at the end, if you're okay with that. So then I would like to introduce Mr. Daniel Platt, Senior Economic Officer, Financing for Development Office at UNDESA. He will talk about enhancing infrastructure asset management at national and local government levels for improved service delivery and sustainable development. Daniel, please take the mic. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you, Professor Sarner, for this very interesting presentation. I assume I'm gonna run the PowerPoint on my screen, right? From my computer. So let me just try to pull it up and go into the presentation mode. Can you all see it? Great. Okay. So as mentioned by Jean, well, first of all, again, thank you for having me here in this forum. It's the second time that I'm presenting. My colleague and boss, Caroline, she made a little speech earlier, I think, where she introduced our work. I'm going to focus on the work stream on infrastructure asset management and try to situate it a little bit in the current discussion on SDG financing, on infrastructure finance. And I think there's some nice linkages here to the work just presented by Professor Sarner. Let me go into the table of content quickly, just to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about. So the first part is really about the toolkits and the program on infrastructure asset management. I'm going to explain what we mean with infrastructure asset management, why it is important at the local level, and some of the concrete toolkits that we have for local governments, but also for national governments to use to improve what we would say organizational culture, practices, and standards on infrastructure asset management. And the nice thing about that is that much can be done without significant resource investments, but it has a very big impact in the medium to long run. And then the second part is about opportunities for you to engage with you. I'm talking mainly at local governments and mayors, but also, of course, the international community that gathered here today. What is infrastructure asset management? Well, if we want to answer this question, we should first look at what infrastructure assets are. And there's no one definition that everyone agrees on, but there's soft infrastructure, hard infrastructure. But for this purpose and for the purpose of the project that I'm going to introduce you to, we're talking about physical things of value that provide or are underlying to a public service to the community. So the typical things we think of when we think about infrastructure facilities are roads, water and sanitation systems, energy grids, waste management systems, ports, but also smaller things like street lighting or parks or cemeteries. These are all assets that are either often owned or perhaps not owned, but managed by local governments or by some sort of partnership between local and public sector, local and private sector. Now, public infrastructure assets are essential to the delivery of basic public services, and that's why they're important. Now, how do we manage infrastructure assets? Infrastructure asset management is really a coordinated series of activities that not only monitors things of value, but maintains them over their lifespan. And when we talk about infrastructure lifespans, this can be anything from 20 to 50 years if it's well managed, or even longer. You see some of the water sanitation systems here in New York City over 100 years old. It certainly needs updating, but it's quite amazing if you think about it, that it has served for such a long time. And then the whole issue of infrastructure asset management involves balancing risks, costs, opportunities, and performance. So it's quite a complex endeavor. And allow me to just go into it a little bit more. Now, why do we care about infrastructure asset management? Well, we all care about infrastructure. I think we can agree that there is a need to invest heavily into infrastructure. It was just mentioned again, and there are different forms of investing into it. However, what gets lost sometimes is the focus on what happens after the investment. And what happens after the investment is that up to, sorry for the, hang on, sorry, I'll go back, yeah, okay. What happens after the investment is that up to 85%, the percentage, what percent is missing there, of life cycle costs actually happen after the construction phase of an asset. It happens during the operation maintaining phase, which is much longer. And it also happens sometimes during the disposal phase. Sometimes you can make money disposing of an asset. Other times it can be very costly if you decommission a power plant, for example, or things like that. Why do we care? Well, if you under-maintain infrastructure, it can lead, according to World Bank estimates and others, to up to a 2% loss in annual GDP. So that's huge and very significant. And then we mentioned earlier that infrastructure is intimately related to the SDGs. And there's, Professor Zana mentioned the study of my colleague, David LeBlanc, of course, but there's also a more recent study by Oxford University and UNOPS, United Nations Office of Product Services, which is a partner in this endeavor to UNDESA, where I think they can clearly show a link of between infrastructure and 92% of SDGs and targets. So this is why we care. Huge losses if we don't do it, underestimated losses if we don't do it, and then a huge link to the SDGs. That's why we care about infrastructure asset management at the local and national level. Now, who does it? At the local level, it's truly a multi-stakeholder effort, and that's why it's so difficult to have a holistic, systematized, long-term approach to it. You have operations, you have tactics, you have strategy, and at each level there are different tasks involved. You think of it perhaps as sort of short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning. Short-term being the operational, medium-term the tactical, and more long-term the strategic vision. Now, the strategic vision is set by the mayor with support of senior administrative and technical staff, city director, city council committee, chief accounting officers. There are different names. We know that for local leaders, elected or not elected. Then at the tactical level, you go a little further down to the director, manager, engineer level, and then you have the technician, mechanics involved at the operational level. And what we're trying to do is really bring everyone together that is involved in managing assets and look at better coordination mechanisms between them. Now, as I said earlier, I wanted to just introduce a few toolkits that we've worked on, and they're based on our work in the field over the last 6 years. And have been recently published about a year ago, and we're now embarking on the next phase of the project to bring these tools to a number of countries in all regions. Those toolkits start out with a diagnostic assessment, and they're all in this new handbook on infrastructure asset management that is available. I'm sure John will have a link on the website. They're available by February. They should be available in 10 different, the book should be available in 10 different languages, including all UN, official UN languages. So it's very accessible, accessibly written. It is very direct. It's sort of, think of it as a textbook for local government officials that don't have a lot of time to think about the theory behind it, but want practical tools. The diagnostic assessment comes in the beginning. You ask local governments how they do asset management. What are the most important assets? How do they manage them? How do they decide how much of that asset is needed in the future? And according to that, you score them on a scale that I'll explain a little bit later on. Based on the diagnostics, you help them do asset management action plans, focusing very concretely on only one asset and improving things there. And then there are more deep dives in the book also on data and information systems, on how to make those AMAPs work in a crisis, and also issues like climate change and assessing vulnerability to climate change and so forth. So I'm not going to spend too much time on these tools. Just want to sort of whet your appetite for them. But as I said earlier, we have piloted them in a few very challenging settings in Bangladesh, Nepal, Tanzania, and Uganda. And this shows you here on the slide on the right-hand side, you see a little bit about, who participated in these interviews, in these assessments. And those assessments are different in every country, and who participates is not up to us really as the partner, but the local governments that we invite to such an assessment, they determine the right people. Who at your local government is involved in asset management, because it really differs from government to government, and even the titles of those functions are very different. But typically we have someone from procurement, someone from finance, an engineer, and someone from the leadership that start with this diagnostic assessment. It has a part of it that is a self-assessment. It's a very useful conversation starter for local governments. And it has a more complex part that requires an on-site assessment, which we have done in our team at UNDESA with the support of UNCDF and UNOPS in the field. But of course, in the long term, the idea is that these on-site assessments are being taken over by assessors from the country, not people that you need to hire or consultants, but ideally people from the central government that deal with local governments that come in there and do periodic assessments. And at some point, hopefully those assessments can even be entirely seen as self-assessments. The first thing after that assessment that you get is a lot of data, a lot of information. And much of the toolkit or a big chunk of the toolkits that we have in the book is about data and how to get that data and turn it into information. Raw data is not information yet, right? So you have to contextualize it, and you have to make difficult decisions as a local government about what data you want to collect and what data you do not want to collect. You don't have the luxury to collect all the information, monitor all types of data for your assets, but you certainly do want to know what assets do you own, what infrastructure are you managing, where is it located, what does the demand look like over the next few years on that, and what condition is it in. And certainly when you think about financing, you also want to know the market value of your assets. Can it serve perhaps as collateral for further investment? So these are all difficult questions. And here you see just some of the indicators, for example, for key performance indicators that can help you and that are explained in some detail in the book to see a little bit how your assets are performing. I'm not going to go into the theory of it, but it just gives you some visuals here and you get the impression. Now, at the heart of our toolkits is what we call an asset management action plan, or AMAP. And it's really a simple process of looking at the data that you now have, looking at the diagnostics that you have done, and really start out improving your asset management practices through a step-by-step process. And that step-by-step process has to start out with putting in place some basic framework of policy, some guiding principles for your asset management that everyone can adhere to. It can be as simple as, we will not abuse our assets. We will make sure our assets are used in a way that maximizes their value for the community. These broad principles are important, and often local governments don't have them. They all believe in them one way or the other, but there's no guiding principle that guides asset management throughout. So we start out with that. Then we go to step 2 and look what type of stakeholders are involved in a particular asset, and what is their impact, what is their influence, what is their interest. And based on that, you go to step 3, 4, 5, which is basically just reviewing how things are done now and how they should be done, what is missing, and how can we achieve the goal for a particular asset with concrete actions. And that's then the action plan. So these action plans are templates that are very, very flexible. They can be used in different ways. And we give them to local governments and ask them just to focus on one priority asset. Often it is roads, sometimes it is waste management systems, sometimes it's water, and to really analyze very carefully who is involved in managing that asset, and how can we make it better. We only focus on one asset in the beginning. It's too much to ask any government to sort of look at all the assets at the same time. But the idea is, of course, later on, that you have these asset management action plans for each and every one of your assets, and you look at them with a bird's eye view, with a portfolio management perspective that really tells you, okay, these are the actions taken for the roads, for example, this year. These are the actions we need to take to upgrade our waste management system. These are the actions we need to take to upgrade our water supply or repair our water supply system. How do we time them correctly? How do we make sure we don't open up a road just right after we paved it because we need to get to the water pipe beneath it? So there's a lot of coordination issues also happening once you have these asset management action plans in place. And the book also spends some time on developing toolkits, how to upgrade those asset management action plans during an emergency. This is something we learned about only in the process of COVID. We realized that our process that we have used still works more or less, but what you really have to do is revisit all your asset management action plans and see what has changed now. You know, sometimes more sort of different stakeholders are coming to the fore now that are more important because of the emergency. There's certain segments of the society you have to protect a little bit more than others because they're more vulnerable to a loss of services. Loss of public service always has a bias towards the vulnerable segments of the population. So what can assets do to help respond to emergencies? Good roads are critical, of course, if you want to give certain goods or bring certain goods to a segment of the population. Water and sanitation systems may increase, pressures on those systems may increase because of emergencies. Pressure on hospitals will increase. So good asset management will be able to adjust to these emergencies. Now, perhaps one of the most critical tools in the handbook is our climate change assessment tool. And it's a very simple tool for local governments to look at what is the actual capacity of your asset and how does climate change affect it in the long term. So you have to, again, look at each asset separately and then look at them together. But the tool that we've used it, and we've developed it very closely with Association of Municipalities that is now working on bringing this tool to local governments in Canada. So it's quite new, and we worked with some experts there to make sure that it actually also works in a more challenging, vulnerable country setting. But it's essentially very, very, very clear what you need to do. First of all, you identify the hazard that climate change poses on different assets, whether it's roads or drainage systems or electricity grids. You formulate a climate impact statement, and then, and I think mistakes are often being made here, you make a vulnerability assessment. So you look at what is the actual exposure to that potential impact and how is my capacity to adapt. And if the vulnerability that results from that is low, you can stop worrying at this stage, or you may just monitor the situation. But if it's medium or high, you want to go into a risk assessment. And the risk assessment, as I said just now, is very different to a vulnerability assessment. A risk assessment really looks at the likelihood of something occurring, the consequences of that, and that gives you some sort of urgency rating that you can now act on. And so we walk local governments and the reader very slowly through this process. It's quite simple, and a lot of local governments know about this, of course, but it helps sometimes to sort of structure your decision-making tree in a certain way, so you can also transparently communicate your climate change objectives, the actions you're taking at the local level to your community. I'm going to jump over this. This is about building an enabling environment. What can be done together by central and local governments to make sure that good national policies are in place, good national guidance is in place that helps local governments manage the assets. This is the last part of my presentation, opportunities for you to engage. And as I said earlier, this is not only directed at local governments, it mostly is directed at local governments, but This is a relatively new approach, infrastructure asset management for local governments, and it's something that the system is buying into. So we have very good partners around the UN system here, also of course with Jean. UNOPS, I mentioned earlier, UNCDF, but also bigger multilateral institutions, multilateral development banks are coming together now to support this. And over the last year and a half, we've really learned to, as many did, to bring our activities online. So online learning opportunities include 3 different types that we have, and we invite everyone to participate in those. So there's asynchronous online learning where we have live workshops for local government officials on these specific toolkits. Each workshop may focus on something different. And we've reached over 2,400 or 2,500, I think, participants last year with that. And it was quite illuminating and amazing to see what you can actually do to do things interactively. With tools like Mentimeter and polling and randomly assigned breakout rooms, if you have a really large crowd, you can really get local government officials engaged. We also have what is commonly referred to as asynchronous online learning opportunities. We just published a free massive open online course that results in UN certification on asset management. And we have hybrid learning, which we just tried out last December, where we have our online trainers coming in through video, but we have a physical gathering of local governments that come together with the support of national consultants. They then do some of these interactive exercises that relate to our toolkits. And in addition, what is not mentioned here, because it's all online learning, we of course hope to be able to go back into the field and continue with physical workshops. However, we've learned from COVID that we can do much more using online tools as well, and we can reach a much bigger audience. What is the result of all this training? I mentioned the asset management action plans earlier. So these are really, as I said, action plans that go over multiple years, that really identify key items that need to be done by different stakeholders involved in managing an asset. Of course, some of them are resource intensive, either human resources or financial resources that are needed. So you need to link them effectively to the budget. You need to make sure that these asset management action plans are actually adopted by the local council, that they have the support from the mayor. And we've seen in our experience that this is absolutely the first important step, is to have this discussed by your local community, to revise it, refine it, and then make sure this becomes part of your budget process, that you actually plan for infrastructure asset management in your, not only in your capital budget, but you also put it into your operational budget. We've seen that those 2 different types of budgets are often not linked. But we've gotten about 150 local governments to commit to asset management action plans. They designed them together within their governments, and they're available on our website where we have a little bit of a sort of it's called a storyboard, I think, where you look at, it's like a repository of these asset management action plans from around the world. They cover all the regions, and we can see that some of them are more detailed than others. But it's a nice way of sort of peer learning, peer reviewing, and presenting the work also to the outside world. And what we're trying to do is, of course, is to come up with some incentive or reward structure for doing this. And we're looking already at things like giving preferred access to municipal investment funds for local governments that have these asset management action plans in place. Private, public investors are interested in good asset management practices. If you know as an investor that your asset will be well maintained, you're more likely to get in there. And also what happens is that the credit worthiness of a local government increases if you have these plans in place. And but how do we measure that credit worthiness? How do we make sure that public-private sector lending institutions pick up on that? So then a lot of sort of outreach, communication, and correspondence is needed between investors and local governments to make the case that this is something that should be supported, right? In itself, it's a good thing, but it should also leverage more resources. And so that's what we're looking at. And local governments that are participating today are warmly invited to participate in this exercise in our online training, or just look at the asset management action template that is online and do it and share it with us. And we're happy to review it and help give comments to it. Now, there's also what we call a network of local governments. So please come to our website. At the very least, sign up to the newsletter. It'll give you a good outline of the activities that are to come. And finally, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but there's the possibility, of course, to apply for technical assistance to support infrastructure asset management at the local national level. Here we work together with the national government. So if there are requests from local governments for assistance, we usually go to the national government, let them know, and see if we can get the entire complex of asset managers involved, because the national level, of course, manages assets as well, especially those that go from state to state. Think about interstate highways, think about big airports. So there sometimes water and sanitation or electricity is at least partially managed by the national government. So we want to include them as well in the discussion. And then we have a certain process that starts out with diagnostics, then is followed up with workshops. Finally, we have implementation support and training of trainers and policy advice. So this and then feeds back into the cycle of new toolkits and revised knowledge material that we have to share. So I cannot say that all technical assistance requests could be accommodated, but it's a growing project. It's a growing initiative, and I think now is a good time to get involved. Over the next 3 years, I mentioned already that we are expanding our activities. So we're looking at new project countries. In addition to Uganda and Tanzania, Bangladesh and Nepal, Kenya, the Gambia, Peru, Costa Rica, Laos, and some others, Somalia as well, it's not mentioned here, are actually becoming part of this initiative and have contacted us at the national level to work with local governments to improve infrastructure asset management. I stop right here. Thank you so much for your attention. Sorry if I confused you a little bit with some of the slides. There's a lot of stuff in there, but I'm happy to get in contact with you. This is the email address there, iamh@un.org. I check it myself. The site link is there as well. And I'll stop right here. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your presentation. I want, as you referred, I want to mention that we had published your printed copies of your this manual that you were talking about, and we were supposed to distribute it at the Mayor's Forum as it was to be in present, and then unfortunately we cannot now at this moment. But we were also hoping to have you for for a workshop, maybe a couple of days, or and then to discuss this with within the Mayor's Forum. But we hope that this eventually will be possible as well, and then other activities we can do together on this issue. Thank you so much. I don't see a question for you directly, Daniel, but I have a question for Professor Zania. I think I see this from Jean Fabre. He appreciates really your presentation, Professor Zania. And he was asking, when a local government wants to find impact investors, how can they get started? So, I don't know, maybe Daniel wants to add eventually, but so.
Having just listened to the brilliant presentation of Daniel, I would suggest they go and knock at his door. And of course, to go back to Jean, Jean, thanks for your question. I think it's more looking at the people within the finance community who have not only just written and flagged their ESG commitments, but who have shown through actual deeds that they are doing their best to make financing of infrastructure different than what has been in the previous time. So there are ESG associations. Some people are well known, but you're right, for people in other parts of the world who don't have easy access, it would be useful to maybe vet some of these associations, and we could do this together with Daniel, with the UN, and put, maybe make available information about organizations who we think are credible, who have a track record on looking at ESG-based investment, and of course everything else also needs to be more through discussions. And the people in municipalities might have neither ever heard of ESG, nor do they know how, even the word asset, that Daniel, you mentioned a lot of asset. They might conjure up different associations with that. So a lot of this could be useful to have a roadshow of just simply presenting what we have now presented within Jean's 4-day seminar, but to go to the cities, if the budget and time is available, to give a little bit of a continuity of explaining and reaching out and letting people come towards us with questions. Because my experience working, for instance, in a lot of developing countries, depending on the culture and the power in place, people don't feel comfortable to speak up. So if we have a good means of, nominal groups method, there are different ways to avoid that people feel either ashamed that they don't know what this asset management means, or they feel uncomfortable saying something that could be interpreted negatively by the authorities. I think I would go for doing a bit of a roadshow and take the messages to the people.
Daniel, yes, you want to follow up on this?
Unfortunately, I wish, we could, they could really come knocking, and we would be able to answer that question effectively. Now, of course, this is, it may sound big what I just presented, but it's a very small program, even compared to any infrastructure initiative in any country. We're investing in infrastructure. It's really about changing organizational culture, improving practices, to hopefully in the longer term be able to attract investors. But I want to say that, a mistake that I see commonly be made in local government finance is to sort of aim for the most complex and advanced market type mechanism. And I'm sure Professor Steiner is very familiar with that as well. The US has a huge municipal bond market. It makes up 25 or 30% of the GDP, the outstanding municipal bonds. And for too long, and periodically it comes up again and again, multilateral institutions, bilateral agencies have sort of tried to pursue that, push that market. But if you look at other developed countries, look at, I think Professor Steiner is also from Germany. Look at Germany, there's a minuscule bond market. There are some states that issue bonds, but local governments are not issuing bonds to raise finance. There's relationship banking that matters, right? And so if you look at how to mobilize finance in a very challenging, and we're not talking about a mega city, we're not talking about Singapore, right? We're talking about maybe Moroto somewhere in the countryside in Uganda, or even a larger city. They will not have access to the capital market because there is no capital market often in these countries, especially not a bond market that is, that serves as a secondary trading system or something like that. So building relationships, and here I agree with Professor Steiner, what is being said, you need to communicate to the most likely investor that you have. It could be a a bank, a local bank. It could be a public investment institution. It could be a municipal investment fund or a national development bank. Most countries have some sort of publicly subsidized investment vehicle. And if the information flows a bit better between local governments that get their house in order, that have really a well-planned, what we refer to infrastructure asset management plan in place, that have consulted within the community, that have resources and revenue sources that can pay back in the long term, they would still need help. A lot of them have no access to free market mechanisms that I just mentioned, but it's a start to look at these lending institutions in the country, establish some relationships, and then see where it goes. And maybe in the longer term, it can become turn into a more advanced mechanism. There's also the issue of pooling, local governments coming together. It's very labor intensive. It has big transaction costs, but it has worked in some cases where you see, in India, for example, you have examples of Tamil Nadu, 12 different local governments coming together, diversifying their investment portfolio and then attracting investment. But the investment that they attract, again, comes from a subsidized lending institution. So let us not put the cart before the horse. Let us be very realistic of what is possible, and let us not shoot for the most advanced market mechanism and then retreat in frustration when it doesn't work. And then 5 years later, we push for it again. That's not the way to go. So but the idea of, this roadshow, of the idea of making sure there's better communication as to what is there and how it can be invested in, that is a very good first step, I think.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And then I'd like to follow up on this, because I know, you mentioned that you are working with in Canada, which is my home country, but also you mentioned that you are working in smaller towns like in Uganda. So basically, the methodology is applicable on a wide range of local governments. This is what I can hear or I can understand. Can you comment on that?
Yes, if you look at the handbook, the tools there are really can be very flexibly applied. And even if it's a local government in Canada, if it's small enough, and it will have some of the same challenges and problems that you see in maybe in Tanzania, because the money is never enough. Own source revenues are never enough. Intergovernmental transfers are important. They may be making up 30-40% of the budget in Canada. They may be making up 80 or 90% of the budget in Tanzania for local government. But you have some of the very same problems. You don't have enough money to keep your assets where they should be. You don't have the money to invest into new assets. And often there's a bias towards short-term interventions that look very good for the local government or the mayor, because it's new and shiny, and there's a ribbon cutting effect, right, to invest into new things. All the while, those older assets get neglected. So the political dynamics are very similar in local governments around the world. And of course, in Somalia, you have different problems. So that's let's see how it works out there. But, we could argue that if you are in a post-conflict setting where no structures are in place, there's very little infrastructure planning that actually works out. You can leapfrog, perhaps. You can put in place the more advanced infrastructure asset management practices, because they don't need to go through the same mistakes that have been done in other local governments. So we'll see about that. But in general, I'd say yes, they are applicable, because they're really just decision-making tools. We're not prescriptive in terms of policies, what should be done. We're not saying, the depreciation system for an asset should be this or that, or, you should look at your assets at least 3 times a month. This is being done by the local government itself. We're just providing these tools that we've developed together with local governments around the world to make sure that, there's some structured process in place that allows stakeholder engagement and consultation. So I'd say yes, Jean, it's applicable, but we're also very, very happy to get feedback from local governments around the world, how we can further improve it.
Thank you very much. And I can see that, Professor Sanier's presentation also, when he discussed about the different partnerships that exist, is very complementary also, because, people also need to be told about those possible partnerships. So I'd like to thank you both. Do you, Raymond, do you want to add something?
Just very briefly, I wanted to say, from a wording point of view, of course, I'm sure Daniel had this question or comment put to him several times already. From people who are not as familiar with the financing industry, asset oftentimes is immediately associated as private sector talk, privately owned. And so by emphasizing asset, some people might misunderstand this as a form of privatization. Is there maybe an alternative or an additional word that could be used to prevent association with, say, privatization or private sector? Nothing wrong with the private sector. I just want to say, how to put this to a community where maybe there are cooperatives or publicly owned land. Like I'm in Switzerland, famous economist Ostrom was studying our Allmend, the publicly run villages. Is there another word to add to what you have already in terms of assets?
Yeah, I understand this. Even in our office, there's confusion. Assets can be financial or non-financial, right? And so you sell an asset, it becomes a financial asset. So we didn't really invent that term. So it's been. You mentioned ISO before, Professor. So you have ISO 55000, where you now have standards for asset management out there. So ISO is putting organizational standards for asset management, and they have ventured into the field of government as well. So they're now promoting standards for municipal asset management. And this is what happened first, like it was called municipal asset management. But when we worked on that, we immediately saw that, it doesn't make sense to just talk about local government assets because so many are managed by different owners. So the term asset, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, is being used by governments to talk about property or physical things that they manage that are the foundation of a public service, whether they owned by the government or not. We, in our work, focus on assets that are owned by governments. We're definitely not promoting privatization. It is more about, finding out what government properties are yours and how can they be better managed to help with services. So perhaps we should, in the future, try to go back to government property instead of asset. But the entire discussion in the field is moving into that direction. So we felt like we got to move with it. And one of the big, lessons we've seen is that ISO, it's a good thing, it's a nice thing, but it's way too sophisticated and broad at this stage for local governments. And it's also something, again, that is being pushed mostly by developed countries. There's some consultation mechanisms going on, but it's a very advanced sort of corporately driven standard that reaches governments. And, we've seen local governments and ministries of local governments around the world trying to, implement it and then, again, be frustrated when they see it's not realizable at this stage. So I take your point, and we've encountered this issue so much in our translations as well. I mean, this is a 400-page handbook. It's quite extensive, and you can imagine, like translating the term asset into Russian or Chinese, it has completely different connotations there as well. It's been quite challenging. So it's probably something we need to work on, and hopefully the terminology can evolve that everyone understands it a little better.
You want to add something? Or that's okay?
You're talking to me, Jean?
Yeah, Raymond, do you want to add something?
Okay, all right. Just one little word to add to it. There is this whole movement towards solidarity and social economy, mostly in the developed world, but also in developing countries that already have more solidarity and social economy. It's just a matter of the wording of government-owned. It could also be maybe softened or you add a complementary word, because in some countries the government is not necessarily the owner of the country, nor a city government. It is an expression of the community. So to find a way to say it's basically yours, and the government plays an important role, but the government doesn't own the city, so to speak. Okay, I haven't done this, so I don't want to get lost in the finite terminology issues, but it's a great presentation. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you to both. I mean, it's also food for thought for us tonight to think about also about our local governments. They're not owning our assets, actually, but we are owning, and then they are just managing it. But then still, Danielle, your work is like to help the government to managing our assets, so basically our belongings. So thank you very much to the two of you, and also I'd like to thank the other speakers. I think they had to go, and I know you also will have to go, but then I would like to close here. Of course, I'd like to thank all the speakers tonight's session, but also to other speakers and presenters who share their experience, knowledge, and wisdom during the whole forum over the last 4 days. I'd like to thank the participants and the audience also for their interest in this meeting, for their patience, and for listening to the presenters and sharing their insightful comments, questions. Despite some of the limitations of the platform we had to use, to conduct such an online meeting. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's session and also the 3 other sessions of the International Mayors Forum. It is my great hope that we will be able to welcome you all in person for the next International Mayors Forum. Meanwhile, I would like to ask you to please stay in touch with us, and please do not hesitate to contact us to share your ideas about on local government's needs for capacity building, where UNOSD and its partners, like you have seen tonight, could potentially respond through capacity development activities such as the International Mayors Forum in the future. I'd like to thank our partners, the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Korea and the Incheon Metropolitan City, where our office is located. I would also like to thank our sister office, UNCRD, for partnering with our office, UNOSD, in this International Mayors Forum. I'd like also to thank our colleagues from UNDESA in New York, as well as our colleagues from the regional office, UN-ECA and UN-ESCAP, for their great support and participation to the forum. Finally, I'd like to thank the UNOSD staff, so our staff and interns, for their hard work in making this meeting a success. Once again, I would like to remind you that the presentation materials will be shared online on the forum's webpage and after the forum. And so will be the reference material and video recordings of the sessions. Please note that there will also be a report that we will produce and will make available on the forums page as well. And please consult also our main page, unosd.un.org, where information about the International Mayors Forum and other UNOSD activities are regularly updated. Thank you. Kamsahamnida. I would like now to invite Mr. Chong-Kyu Park, Head of Office of the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, UNOSD, and he'll be followed by Mr. Yasushige Endo, Director of the United Nations Center for Regional Development, for their farewell remarks. Jong-yu, please, the microphone is.
Hey, thank you, John. Distinguished speakers and participants, as we are about to complete the 2021 to 22 International Mayors Forum, I would like to extend to all of you speakers, participants for their invaluable contribution to make this 4-day event step closer to the successful conclusion, despite it being conducted and organized virtually. Obviously, my special thanks go to my staff, UNOSD, and research assistants who demonstrate their ability and passion to make this event successful. With rich and timely contents discussed in this additional International Mayors Forum, we have chances of opening up much broader spectrum on the ways of recovering from the COVID-19, focusing on subnational and city government roles. It is popularly said that crises can also be seen as opportunities, and perhaps that is the essence of building back better and planning for a post-pandemic recovery. Yet, we must also be mindful of hard ground realities. COVID-19 has greatly impacted every corner of our daily lives, which were taken for granted in the past, no matter where you live in developed or developing countries. It has exposed vulnerabilities and limitations at national, subnational, and local levels, and caused casualties in the millions. Hence, over the last 4 days of discussions on varied but closely connected themes, our international experts, scholars, mayors, practitioners, and local actors from around the world have sought to identify and share simple and practical solutions that are within the reach of cities and local communities. I genuinely hope that all participants will be coming away from this wide-ranging conversation with ideas, inspiration, information, and food for thought that will make a difference in their lives and the lives of their students, colleagues, constituents, and urban communities. We hope to continue these conversations, the need for which is perhaps greater than ever before, as with our common agenda, the Secretary General stressed the need to strengthen the international ties, multilateral agreements, and deliver global public goods equitably and sustainably. It is in keeping with this spirit that we seek to learn from and help each other coping with these challenges we encounter at this moment. And I hope that this forum has served to remind ourselves of the need for collective efforts for sustainable recovery from COVID-19 and towards sustainable development. Thank you once again for making this event a success, and I hope to see you all again in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jong-yu. Now, Endo-san.
Thank you, John. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to speak on the closing ceremony of the International Mayors Forum. First, UNCLD would like to thank UNOSD for organizing this forum, and thank UNDESA for supporting the forum, and thank partner organizations and all participants. International Mayor Forum is an interesting platform where local governments, civil societies participating from anywhere in the world we can discuss global and local issues, but those issues are related to the internationally agreed policies, goals, and targets, including SDGs and Paris Agreement, the Addis Ababa Action for Financing, Sendai Framework, Disaster Risk Reduction. So it's so-called Act Locally and Think Globally. And I like it, and I myself this time made a presentation on smart city and disaster risk reduction. I really enjoyed a discussion with speakers and participants. One of the UNCLD's priority is a program for localizing SDGs. Nowadays, SDGs management is indispensable perspective for local governments and private companies. Many local governments, businesses, and civil society are already taking the SDGs into their own hands and make efforts to achieve SDGs. For local governments, it's extremely essential to promote creative SDG related initiatives and play a leading role in each region. This time, my colleague worked for coordination with Yokohama City and Bangkok Metropolitan Administration. I believe such networking is indispensable for achievement of SDGs, and this networking mechanism is an interesting part of the International Mayors Forum. As I mentioned in my opening remark, UNCLD recently released SDGs Evaluation Handbook, which provides a tool of SDGs evaluation methods. So these methodologies are already applied to the Japanese local government, and hopefully we like to work this methodology applied to other cities in the world. Handbook helps local government evaluate achievement status of SDGs. So UNCLD would like to contribute to the International Mayors Forum through our activity using these evaluation methodologies. Finally, let me repeat the announcement that we have the 50th anniversary commemorative event. It will be on 23rd February. If you have time, we appreciate for your participation. So I really look forward to seeing you in the next International Mayors Forum. Thank you for your attention.
On this, I think we can call this a day, a week, a forum. So thank you very much to all, and then we hope to see you next time. And please follow up our activities on our website again, and then samida. Bye-bye.